everybody, and welcome to the How episode with the one and only Shaila Khan Leekha. Hello, Shaila.
Hi, Elena. So good to be here.
Welcome. So happy to have you.
Thank you.
Now, you just launched a new ETF. Do you want to tell us why it's so important?
Yes, I would love to. So we started our company. It was myself and another Wharton grad from a couple years ahead of us, class of '02. Her name is Gabriella Herculano. And we got together at the end of 2019. And we thought, well, we were familiar with the investment market, especially when it comes to climate investing. We had worked together for a number of years at GE Capital, doing renewable energy investing across Europe. And so when we came together, we thought we were both looking at sort of what to do next. And it was her idea. There's a third co-founder that helped us start the company, a Wharton undergrad from the 70s, HBS also from the 70s. And he was a serial entrepreneur. And so the idea was to create a financial services firm where we could create an investment product that allowed people to invest for the purpose of climate, but in a much more quantifiable, research and data-driven way than what is currently available on the markets. I had a short stint just before this working at Fitch credit agency's new ESG practice. So I was aware of the grumblings in the market about greenwashing and the difficulty of using scorecards. And so it seemed like a great idea. And so we spent the last couple of years getting the data together, working with a small team of our analysts, and very excited to say we have two products. The first was launched on the London Stock Exchange in December of 2020. It's already at break even, about 50 million AUM. Our second product was launched across Europe in June. And we took both products and launched them on the New York Stock Exchange this July. So very excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's so important. The quantifying part is what was missing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's what we felt. There's a great deal of desire to want to do more, especially when it comes to climate. And working in a way that somehow has impact has always been something that's personally very important to me. And so the fact that we could bring together the two aspects, the financial services aspect, as well as something that we feel is making a real tangible difference, it just was super exciting. And I have to say the market has been very receptive as well. Every time we get in front of people and tell them the story and our approach, they're excited to hear it and they believe in it. It's still very young and early, especially in the US. So, we very much have all the pressures of a new company trying to sell its product, get its name out there. And it's been a fascinating learning experience, very steep learning curve for both of us with our very non-entrepreneurial backgrounds, working in large corporates, but it's been a lot of fun. And I'm happy to say that we have a number of Wharton classmates, '04 classmates, who are very much our supporters and backers in all kinds of ways, from being sounding boards to being direct investors in our business, and I couldn't be more grateful.
Well, that's wonderful. And you said that it's personally important to you. Do you care to elaborate?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So throughout my career, I've always had this sort of, dual aspiration. There's been a part of me that's wanted to do something that creates some kind of impact. And there's been another part of me that's motivated by learning and good with working with numbers and analytical, to put it in this very blunt way, I guess. And I guess that's the result of the fact that I grew up in both Pakistan and the US. So I was born in Karachi, from Pakistan, but my father was posted to DC when I was really young. So we moved to the US when I was 4. And we spent the next 8.5 years there. And going back to Pakistan, around the age of 13 was a bit of an eye-opening experience in many ways. But one of the things that I think always stuck with me is I was very conscious of sort of the difference in my life and the life I'd had in the US to the life that I saw a lot of people around me. And even when I was applying to universities for undergrad, I ended up going to Georgetown. I remember my essays even back then were talking about, wanting to do something to help. And trying to figure out how to merge the two, because, my skill set, again, my strongest subjects were always economics and math. And at first I thought maybe I'll go and do a PhD. And then I remember there were people that influenced me and discussions I had, and they were like, the world has enough people who enter and are passionate and are working at NGOs and doing policy. What there isn't enough of are people with hard skills who go into these kind of fields. And, there was also the exciting allure of working in a place like New York and getting hands-on experience and the kind of things that I like. So that impact has always been something that I've thought a lot about. And at one point I shifted careers. So I started working in banking at Houlihan Lokey in New York. That was my first job out of college. But I switched after just 2 years to join the World Bank at IFC, which is a part of the World Bank group, but operates as a commercial lender, as a corporate lender, but as a lender of last resort, so in the most difficult markets. So that in many ways satisfied sort of all the buckets, because I was doing finance, I was providing project finance loans, but I was doing it in economies like Ghana and Jamaica and the kind of countries, and working with the kind of sponsors and companies that might not have access to capital otherwise. So I enjoyed that time very much. And then throughout my career, I've kind of gone back and forth. So the majority of my career has always been in the private sector, but I had another stint working in the public sector when I joined the Department for International Development, DFID, here in the UK several years ago. And again, it was my shot at trying to do something more for impact after having worked at G Capital for a number of years and post-Wharton. And I tried that for a couple of years, and it was great. I learned a lot. The learning curve was very steep. I took a massive pay cut, but my responsibilities were also much, much greater. I worked for a cabinet minister and had a very large portfolio of responsibilities and a big staff and division below me. But ultimately, after a couple of years, I felt working in the public sector wasn't probably the best place for my skills at this point in my career. But I have continued since then working on boards of nonprofits and international charities. So I'm on the board of 2. So that's sort of my link to the development world and a way of making impact, while I thought I was better suited to the private sector. But that was what was nice when Gabby approached me in 2019, especially in the last few years, the ramp up and interest of investors in ESG and sustainability. It's made a real difference to the corporate world. When you have, heads of banks and Larry Fink and all these people talking about it's saying that companies should be focused on more than just returns, that, you have to be accountable to stakeholders as well, and people care about that impact. It feels like both my interests, both the dual sort of aspects of my career have come together in a way. And with the product and the company that we launched, we have that benefit. We feel like we are making an impact because we're looking at companies and quantifying their impact from a climate perspective using our methodology. But at the same time, because of the fact these companies are so well positioned to provide the solutions the world needs as we transition to a greener economy, they're also very much poised for growth. So it's a way we can focus on impact, but without compromising on returns. It's still very much private sector focused. So, it's great. It's the two parts of my career kind of coming together in one.
Yeah, that sounds so powerful. Shaila, do you believe that ultimately, sooner or later, everybody finds that path? Or do you think, did it happen naturally for you, or did you have to work for it?
It's a really good question. I don't know the answer for others, but I feel for me, I was extremely lucky. There were definitely fortuitous events that happened, but also I took some risks for sure. So when our third child was born, and as you know, I'm married to another classmate, Jassy from 04. Like many of us, I think we have a lot of couples in our class, right? Record-setting number. But when we had our third child, it coincided with a time in his career where he started traveling pretty much every other week. And so I took a decision to take a pause, and I took a number of years off and focused more on, we had moved house and we had our 3 kids. So it was a bit of a risk. And I knew, I think in total it was about a 4-year break. And when I was thinking of going back into the work world, I was considering a number of different options. And there was this opportunity at Fitch, the credit rating agency, and it wasn't originally with their ESG practice. It was sort of this program for women that had been out and wanted to get back in. So I thought about it, and it suited me and my background in project finance and debt very much, but it was very much a step back, especially from the last job and position I'd had at DFID, which was a very senior role. So I wasn't sure if it made sense, but I remember, I can't remember where I'd read it, or perhaps it was something from Steve Jobs, but I remember thinking that, action is better than inaction, and you never know where a road might lead. And if there were no better opportunities, and that worked for a number of other reasons that suited sort of our lifestyle, I took the opportunity. And after the sort of 2 to 3 month program, I talked to everybody when I was at Fitch. I met with everybody that was willing to speak with me. I found out about this newly created ESG practice. And the MD who had just started it was looking for a very small team. They were thinking of making an acquisition at the time, and he wanted some help with that. So I ended up joining, I only stayed for a few months because they didn't end up moving ahead with the acquisition. But at the time, I thought long and hard about whether I should stay or shouldn't stay. And so again, leaving it when it didn't exactly work out to be what I wanted it to be was another major risk. But I always continued talking to a lot of people. And then when Gabby and I got together later that year, it just so happened that my experience working with Fitch and having spent that time made my experience and knowledge very relevant and current to what we were trying to do. So it was fortuitous, but also if I hadn't sort of taken that step back, I'm not sure it would have been as I could have added as much value as I did in the beginning.
Yeah, that it would have worked out so perfectly all together.
Yeah.
Sounds like a synchronicity. But at the same time, it sounds like a synchronicity of your own doing.
You
made it happen.
Perhaps there was, I think I was very lucky. I was fortunate. And Gabby and I work very well. I know so many people who say they think about being entrepreneurs and the biggest stumbling block is having someone that you want to partner with, because doing it alone, I know, is tough. And finding someone who's like that perfect partner, and she and I have been friends for a very long time. We both work together with each other, so we both know what, where we both stand and what we're both capable of. But at the same time, having that kind of knowledge and passion, we were at the same place in terms of our lives and wanting, this kind of an opportunity. So yeah, I think luck was definitely a big part of it for sure. But yeah, I do now believe, and I tell people that a lot, that action is always better than inaction. If you're never sure of what's going to come next, don't spin wheels too much. Just go out for whatever's there, as long as it feels even mildly intriguing or builds a skill or works for some aspect of your own personal life. I think you just never know where to lead.
Wow, that's a great advice. Thank you, Shaila.
Pleasure.
It resonates with me deeply. I'm very curious about your family and how you grew up. You touched upon, where you grew up, but what influenced you? What shaped you as a person?
Yeah, so I was born in Karachi, and I don't have many memories of my very young life before we moved when I was 4 to the U.S. But I had a great, very typical sort of childhood growing up in the outskirts of Washington, D.C. I went to the public schools there. And moving back to Karachi when I was 13, as I said, it was definitely a bit of an adjustment. And I think the biggest adjustment factor, was the lack of freedom. I went from being, a 7-year-old who could walk out the door and bike till, 9, 10 p.m. and come home sort of when I wanted, as long as it wasn't too dark, to suddenly having high walls around me and needing to be very careful of how I move. So perhaps that fueled my, certain aspects of my personality and desire for independence always. But also, as I mentioned, going back and then seeing the difference in the way of life of so many people, it was eye-opening. It touched me deeply. And coming from the US, I had very strong ideas of, everybody is created equal and everyone should have opportunities. And perhaps I felt a great deal of privilege and felt a bit of responsibility, having been born into privilege, to do something about it. So it definitely shaped my worldview. I would say also, going back to Pakistan, where there was literally, at that age, I think we had one TV channel that turned off at 10 p.m. and perhaps started at about 7. And, again, it wasn't a place where you could come home from school and jump on a bike and go out the house, which is what I did, from a very young age in the US. I was always out. And so I remember always, especially in the beginning, never knowing what to do. And I ended up becoming a voracious reader, which my father is too. So I got that from my dad, who passed away this year. But, since he's passed, I realized how much of an influence he's had on who I am. And that would probably be one of the biggest factors, I think, that I got from him and defines me. I'm a voracious reader. I would say that, he's always been, all my memories of him are always sitting at the end of the day reading, a number of books and of all different kinds. And I've always been like that. All 3 kids of mine are bookworms like me as well. But when I look back, I think growing up in Karachi and being in Pakistan, having kind of, an interest in reading very widely, and I did all the time. I might not have done that had we not gone back. So Pakistan gave me a lot too. And it also opened up my world in a way perhaps that otherwise I wouldn't have had, happen. So I think that was another major influence, my love of books, which continues to this day, and which I'm happy to say I got partly from moving back, a lot from my father, and which I've passed on to my kids as well. That also is something I realized that has shaped me a great deal. We've had, all of us, difficult years this past year, haven't we? And for some, I think it's been harder than others. For us, for Jassy and myself, it's been that we both lost a parent, and it wasn't easy. But, it's something I realize in every reunion that I've been back to. We talk about that, how each of us talk about the very real kind of life that's been happening to all of us over the years, and everybody has their own stories and things that affect them. And yeah.
Shaila, you touched upon several things that intrigued me. Like how your dad was a voracious reader and he passed it on to you, and you passed it on to your kids. And there's this notion of how we become our parents. I'm very curious what you have noticed about yourself and how you been, whether proven this right or wrong in your own family.
It's an interesting question. I guess, as I mentioned, I didn't realize until my father passed away how similar I was to him. And, I find it shocking that I didn't see it before, but we are, I'm very much like him. So I guess I wouldn't have said I was like either of them. I guess my life is different in some ways. For instance, if I compare myself to my mom, she was a full-time stay-at-home mother, very focused on the kids and the house. And, for me, it's been different, except for the few years I've done a bit of both, taking care of the kids and trying to focus on my career. But, it's funny, when it comes to my personality traits, I'm a little bit like both of them, but I would say I'm probably more like my dad. So his love of reading, his love, I'm not sure he loved it, but he traveled extensively, partly because, he was a diplomat those years in the US. And I always used to want to hear about where he's going, and we could never go with him. And I always, remember feeling very frustrated and wanting to see the world. And so that's always been a big driver for me, and not going to kind of the places most people would want to. Like, I loved going to Ghana for my first project. I love going to places that I have no idea what it'll be like. And, that kind of curiosity I think I got from him too. So, yeah, I guess, there are a lot of parallels, a lot that I am like both my parents in many ways, but also very different.
How that richness of background translate to your kids? Do they speak Urdu or Hindi? How do they? I guess the question is, how do they identify?
It's a very good question, and we've had discussions about this with them. So they have a Canadian passport from a father who's Canadian but of Indian descent. They have British passports because they were born in London, where we live and have lived for the last 16 years. And their mom is, of course, also an American passport holder who's from Pakistan. And if you ask them, where do you feel like you're from? When they were little, my eldest daughter would say she feels Indian, which is really funny because she's never even been to India of all those places. And now increasingly, I think they see themselves as British and, they're kind of global citizens. Like I think a lot of kids now are, a lot of our Wharton classmates' kids, are in the same boat. And I have a little bit of, insight into how that feels being from different places and, feeling like you're from multiple places. So I wish I had taught them Urdu. I'm embarrassed to say I've never been as comfortable speaking Urdu, especially with them. I could have when they were first born, and I wish I had. I know a lot of people who do, even if their language isn't perfect. And I did try. By the time my third was born, I did kind of give it a go, and I spoke Urdu to him, and I found my Urdu actually improving, which was a real plus. I wish I had done it with the other two. But of course, as he got older and he saw me talking to his sisters, older sisters in English, and of course, Jassy and I speaking in English, that kind of fell to the side very quickly. So I would say they do feel, British, but also they feel a connection to certainly our heritage, also to Canada, because we visit and spend time in Vancouver for the summers around their cousins. They visited Pakistan. We used to go regularly until the past couple years, and they've always enjoyed that and look forward to that. So yeah, they are very much British, but with a lot of connections to the whole world, which is really nice.
Shaila, what are your main priorities for your kids? What do you want for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I want them to be self-confident and self-respecting, good people, happy people who, also in their own ways give back to the world. I guess that's always kind of, what I hold sort of in my head. But ultimately, just want them to be good people and to be happy. And especially in London life, you can get very caught up with the school's choice and the exams and one place leading to the next and wanting certain things for them. But in the end, it's all about them being happy and, having good role models, and myself and Jassy. Sometimes, especially my eldest, will begrudge the fact that I'm not always around. I went back to work when she was 6 months old. So for my first two, I continued full-time work. It was only after my third that I stopped. And so I think she feels that very much. And she's a talented little girl. She's 12, but when you ask her what she wants to be, all she ever says is, I just want to be a mummy and I'm going to stay at home with my kids all the time. So I'm sure that her experience and mine, probably played a part in that. But yeah, I'd want them to explore their interests and do whatever makes them happy and, feel confident and always be happy.
That's beautiful. How old are the other two and what are they like?
So, my eldest is 12. The middle one is 10, also a girl. And then my youngest is 7, a little boy, and they each have their own very strong personalities. Each one is different. Hard to believe sometimes that they're all from the same. It really is. You realize. Yeah, they're all very sporty. As I said, they're all bookworms. So all 3 of them love nothing more than just sitting and being absorbed in whatever books they're reading. The eldest, she's very communicative and vocal. She just is used to kind of getting all the attention of the parents, so she'll kind of always have an opinion and a view. And then the second one is quieter and holds back, and I would say is perhaps a deeper thinker, but notices everything. I tell each of them that they have their own superpowers. So my eldest, her superpower is amazing memory and communication, and the second, her power is observation. She will not miss a thing. And then the youngest, he's just any sport he seems to pick up, he has amazing coordination. So we always say his superpower is that hand-eye coordination. So they're all little superheroes in their own way.
That's what a blessing.
Absolutely.
Did you, when we were at Wharton, we all had ideas about how our lives would turn out. Mm-hmm. How do you feel right now? Is there more, are there any dreams that you have yet to fulfill, or maybe they've evolved and changed into something else? What are you looking forward to?
That's a good question. Well, I can tell you I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. I can tell you that for 100%. My personality is not at all suited to it. There's a reason why I did project finance and debt for most of my career, because I'm incredibly conservative in my outlook. I'm always expecting, looking at, what can go wrong instead of thinking, what if things work out much better than... So, I'm always very much, very cautious in my approach. So, in terms of how I thought my life would turn out, I guess I'd always planned. At some point, I always even knew I was going to do an MBA. I always knew I was going to get to that point, study, probably go into something that involved numbers, either economics or ended up being banking, do something that's hopefully global, that has some kind of meaning and impact. And then I knew, I wanted to go to a business school, and definitely, Wharton was one of my top choices. And, I always hoped I'd get married and settle down and have kids too, but I never thought much about what comes next. And figuring out how to make it all work with the kids and figuring out, what I want for a career. I have to say, I feel incredibly fortunate because starting your own business, I haven't worked this hard since I was in my 20s in my banking days. It's just nonstop. It's day and night, it's weekends, and, it's just kind of the nature of the beast, but it's also incredibly fulfilling. It's because it's all, it's all up to you. So you take full ownership and responsibility for what works and what doesn't. You've got to figure everything out from, fundraising to execution to strategy to best partnerships to even the most mundane things. I found it incredibly fulfilling and have been surprised at that. So in terms of what I hope, I would never have expected to be doing this. I'm really enjoying it. I'm able to kind of carve out time for family and other things that, mostly family, actually, that, is the only thing that really competes. And so I would say as the next iteration, what I look forward to hopefully this company being a real success for us selling our products and them growing in the US. So fingers crossed, all my attention is going to be on that for the next year. For our great Wharton investors and all our investors, as well as just for our company. So that's going to be my biggest priority in the very short term. But in the long run, I'm really open to what comes next because just like I didn't know that this might have materialized, I'm not sure what the next step might be. And I've never fully let go of that kind of development impact sort of interest. And, my foray into the world of policy, working for DFID, it wasn't the right time, but I always wonder, perhaps there's another kind of, another scenario where I might go back into that in several years. Just to affect policy with much more experience and knowledge of how that world works, potentially. But who knows? Maybe I'll still be, working with iClima 10 years from now, and it'll be a very big, very different iteration from what it is now. So I'm open. I just hope that whatever it is, I'm still learning and contributing in some way, building something, interesting.
It's so remarkable to me that you said that you are open. It is the hardest thing to do. And especially for the MBA types, such as ourselves, we oftentimes know what we want so well that it puts the blinds. And we may miss something that's even more incredible that, we had come up with for ourselves. So kudos.
I think that's
brilliant.
Yeah, I think that is very true. I think that is true because you just never know what kind of conversation or opportunity. And, we see it even with our business. There's all kinds of just random meetings that might take place. So for instance, our very first iteration of our company, we knew we wanted to do something in financial products and investment related to climate. And we knew our approach would be to quantify the impact of each company of our portfolio in terms of how much they can reduce emissions in the atmosphere through their products and services. So it was a different way entirely of looking at investing for climate, and it was thoughtful and quantitative. But our first iteration was going to be to create a retail platform for people to buy and trade shares, on our platform. And very quickly we started, realizing even before COVID hit in a big way that that's probably not the best way to go about it. But it was a conversation with a friend who was very much into the world of indices and ETFs, and he had mentioned his own experience, and he was like, you should really think about that because it allows you to focus on the intellectual aspect of what you're creating, your methodology, and you don't have to worry about getting regulated because there are partners that'll create the product off the back of your index. Creating an index is not hard to do. It's also not very expensive to do, but creating the ETF is, and there's a lot of regulation that goes around it. And I wouldn't have really gone down that path and started looking into it and, exploring that if it hadn't been for that kind of chance encounter. And we were both at a swimming pool with our daughters and their classes, that's how we know each other is from our kids. And, you just never know what conversation will spark something and set you off in a direction. And now we look back and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what we would have done if we hadn't gone down this path because it makes so much sense. It makes a lot of sense for our product because ETFs in the world of, passive investing is growing rapidly, and it makes a lot of sense in terms of ESG as well because sustainability within that space is growing a lot as well. But we also don't have to worry about the regulation and the other bits of it. So you just never know what conversation or idea will lead to something else.
Yeah, definitely. And probably that's somewhat applies to Wharton. You said that Wharton was on top of your list, but
absolutely,
how come that you ended up going there? And obviously, it became a pivotal moment in your life in more than one way.
Absolutely, that's very true in many ways. But yeah, Wharton was always at the top of my list. The reputation, I always knew it as a bit of a finance school, but also just, generally a great place to get an MBA. We also had family. One of our cousins from Pakistan had done a sub-matric, so she had gone from the undergrad to the MBA in 2002. She had said great things as well. And I had cousins who'd gone there for undergrad. But it was always, it's close to DC. It was always sort of on my mind. And when I went to visit it, it really resonated with me. The people, I had a very close friend from my undergrad who went there as well. And I had visited her on campus. And so I always was drawn to the experience. And then, of course, when I joined, you're absolutely right. It was kind of life-changing. I met my husband there. So Jassy, I wouldn't have met him had I not gone. Such an amazing group of friends that I'm still in touch with to this day, and we've, some of them, especially those in London, we've sort of grown up post-Wharton together, had kids around the same time, navigated our career choices at the same time. And, it's been such an interesting mix of such talented people doing all kinds of unique and interesting things all over the world. You couldn't get that anywhere else. So yeah, I tell everyone, I mean, it was, among the 2 best years of my life for sure. I enjoyed it immensely, and it opened up all kinds of ways of seeing the world, and I'm incredibly grateful for that time. So we're already planning to take our kids there on trips to encourage them to apply, and I don't know if they'll get in, but yeah, but no, it gave a lot to me. It gave a lot to me. And I'm trying to give back. So I've signed up to interview alums, and I'm trying to join that network to volunteer. So trying to give back a little bit if I can.
That's awesome. And we have this question that we usually ask. To me, Wharton is the place blank. How would you complete that sentence?
Wharton is the place that opened up the world for me in a whole different way, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. Not just in terms of career, but also friendships, opportunities. Climbing Kilimanjaro was a trip that, was organized through the class with a lot of us. That was amazing. So many different experiences on so many different levels. So yeah, I would say that opened up the world in a whole different way.
Shaila, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Elena. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll be with you shortly with another brilliant human from Wharton. Thank you, Shaila.
Thanks, Elena.